about the difference between SWOT and SOAR. Now, SWOT analysis is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Henry Mintzberg wrote a book about, probably it's going about 20 years ago, called Strategy Safari, which was about the history of the use of all the different tools and the different philosophical approaches to strategic planning. And SWOT comes from those early days. Formal strategic planning in organizations only really started around the 1950s. And so SWOT comes from that amount of time. So we're all the way back then. So let me ask you, what is people's experience with SWOT?
I've had some good experiences with it, but I'm, McKinsey trained, so.
Yes. So some good experiences. In essence, at the end of that, of your time doing a SWOT, how was your energy in general? Drained, crashed. I kept looking for pictures of exhausted people. I kept finding one with a guy with his tie pulled up like that. So in the end, strategy is really about giving energy. I spent a number of years traveling internationally doing sales and marketing strategy, and it was all about processes that did stuff to people rather than with people. Got to one of the big four, hoped I would learn more of the more engaged process of change management and strategy execution, and found it was a little bit more of the same. So I left and went out on my own and began looking for what are those processes that really help us to engage people and that make people want to engage in the change. Because we're living in such a time that change is so drastic that we have to be flexible, agile organizations. So I kept looking for processes. I am the big promoter here in New York of appreciative inquiry. Still love it. Still, the philosophical approach still drives most of my work. And emerging out of that is the SOAR process. So when we talk about strategy execution truly needing to have energy, and we look at the word SOAR, what does it conjure up for you? Rise. What else? Thriving. Flying. Right? So soaring above it all and really being able to reach new peaks. And if we think of the word SWOT, what comes to mind? SWOT. There we go. All right. So yeah, we're just swatting. And so in the end, we look at SWOT and our energy generally, unless it's really well done, can be really draining because it's not always facilitated by a nice McKinsey consultant or one of the others. So they're very often done internally, and for those of you who have felt beaten up by the process, where did you spend the bulk of your time? Threats and the weaknesses. And then when we get bogged down in the weaknesses, what are we really talking about? Problems and who's to blame. And so then it becomes a blame game and we're starting to point fingers at each other. So how are we truly going to survive and create a real solution? So Albert Einstein said we cannot solve problems with the same thinking that created them. And in a conversation with Jane Watkins many, many years ago, we were talking about the typical problem-solving approach. So we have a timeline, and we begin the process, and we have our level of productivity. And oops, all of a sudden, we have a problem, and productivity goes down. So now we go into solution-finding mode, or actually root cause analysis. What's the root cause of this? And then we spend time looking for the solutions. And because we're looking to solve a problem, it gives us a very different set of lenses through which we're looking at things. And so, yes, we finally potentially find a solution, and we begin that implementation, and how much time has gone on, right? This could be 6 months, a year later, which basically brings us just back to where we were productivity-wise 6 months or a year prior. And so ultimately, is the solution still relevant with the pace of change that we are now experiencing? Because what we might have created could be irrelevant because a new startup could have totally displaced whatever we were doing before, because we were so focused on just getting back to where we were. And so it is through language that we create the world, because it is nothing until we describe it. And when we can describe it, we create the distinctions that govern our actions. To put it another way, we do not describe the world we see the world we describe. So our image of the future drives our action and drives the types of solutions that we're finding. And that's where the SOAR model really can be a very big boon to creating a very different image and a very different lens through which we see our world. So the SOAR process begins with our strengths. It's the search for what gives life. If anybody has studied appreciative inquiry, it's the search for what works in an organization and what gives life to an organization. And so when we look at our strengths, we're looking at our achievements, our technical assets, our financial assets, our social capital, the culture, the core values. All of these elements make us who and what we are and what makes us so successful. So we begin with that search. Then we get into the opportunities. And here we're looking at what are the best possible market opportunities, as well as we're also looking at what are our stakeholders asking for. Has anybody read The Lean Startup, which is all about really getting into understanding your customer and having the minimum viable product? So it's about knowing what are our customers looking for and needing, or what problems or jobs are they trying to get done. It's also about looking at that whole list of strengths that we had, and if we were to maximize those, take them to an even higher level, what opportunities exist? And then how can we reframe our threats and our weaknesses in such a way that they become irrelevant? So it's taking all of those threats and weaknesses and reframing them into what would it look like if those problems didn't exist? What is the opposite of the problem, or what is our desired future state 6 months from now, a year from now? Where do we need to be in relation to what our customers are asking for? What is our intention, and what would that problem look like if it didn't exist? So then, once we have named all of those opportunities, we begin dreaming, the aspirational piece of the model. This is the dreaming part of appreciative inquiry. So what is our preferred future? So what do we care deeply about? What should we become? Where do we really see we need to be in relation to where we see our markets and market segments going? And then if we were to collectively realize our highest aspiration for our expressed opportunities, what would that future look like? If you've ever done a full appreciative inquiry, the final question is, imagine your wishes and dreams, you were to go to sleep tonight and they all came true when you woke up in the morning. Describe that world and put it in as much richness and detail as possible. Think of it as a jigsaw puzzle box top. What does the jigsaw puzzle box top do for you when you're doing a jigsaw puzzle? The image of what you're building, your end result. With, here's where the sky is, here's where the river is, here's the trees, etc. You know exactly what your end result is. You want to describe that in much richness and detail as possible. And then to ground it, to bring it back down to reality, we have our results. What are the measurable results? How will we know we have indeed achieved that aspiration? So what measures will tell us we have indeed achieved that aspiration, and what are the 3 to 5 indicators that are critical? And how will we know we have achieved our aspiration? So let me ask you, how's it feeling so far?
Very exciting.
Yeah. Does it feel energizing? All right. And, so does anybody have any concerns about it so far?
Can we get too far? Can we get too far with being on top of it?
Can we get too far with being on cloud 9. What do the rest of you think? It's possible. And once we really start getting down into a big discussion about the results, that's where we really are grounding it back down into what's really doable. And so whenever I do discuss this, I talk about when we do a SWOT analysis, sorry, I'll come back to that. It kind of feels like this. We're trying to push a rock uphill because we see these weaknesses and our threats as insurmountable, sometimes obstacles. Whereas, and this is from an actual trip I took many years ago down the Grand Canyon, the obstacles are just rocks in the river, and see this person, there's a person over here, he's looking to see, all right, how are we going to navigate through the rapids to get around those rocks? And so that's what SOAR enables us to do, because yeah, our vision may be much more greatly expanded. However, it gives us the energy to find a way around the obstacles and around the threats that are there. And coming back to our differences, whereas SWOT can be very static model, because very often in a lot of processes, it's check mark, oh yeah, we're done, we did the SWOT analysis, where they really have not synthesized anything out of the entire model. Henry Mintzberg was on a panel over the summer at the Academy of Management, and he was saying that what a lot of our organizations needs is the ability to synthesize. There's so much data out there, and now it's creating useful information. So out of these models, we really need to do a synthesis. When we are doing SOAR, you have already created your vision. You have your vision already established. You also have your major goals and SMART objectives established by the time you're done. Whereas you may get your goals out of your SWOT analysis. The SWOT analysis is weakness and threats focused, whereas the SOAR is strength and opportunity focused. And it's really about innovation and breakthroughs. So is it visionary? Yeah, but that's what we need to be in this day and age. When, I think it's, is it Tim Kelly from IDEO? He said, where do we get our best ideas? Yeah, in the shower, or when we're walking outside. My other colleague here, he was talking about going out to the park, or when we're driving, because that's when we're giving our time and our brain space to be imaginative. With SOAR, it gives us a collegial space to be imaginative and to stretch our thinking. And it is very much about energy creation, and I'll tell you, I have stories of where I've seen people just totally switch their energy. I teach this in classes on a regular basis for and I give them 15 minutes. And I did this, I know there's some UPenn folks here. I did this at UPenn a couple of weeks ago, and there was a technologist who had spent 3 years trying to solve a problem, and in the 15 minutes that we had, he found a solution with his colleagues. And it was amazing. So I'm trying to get permission to write that one up. So, it really is about engagement. And this model is still as effective for your own personal development, to do family plan, to plan for your family's dreams of what they want to do as a family, or for your personal self. So it's really a very powerful tool. So I look at it as the beginning of, or as part of that whole appreciative process. So we reframe things, then we begin to, once we know what we want to get, we look at what we want to create, what strengths do we have, once again, around what we want to create, what possibilities exist that we haven't thought of yet, what do we as a team want to make happen, and then how will we make it happen, and there is where you begin your journey into implementation. And so there are some resources there, and if anybody wants to come talk to me, I do have a shortened handout of what we have here. Thank you very much.